What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Draft Season Never Ends, the Aftermath NFL Draft Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I am Chris McGlynn. I'm excited to get into it, man. We got 3 weeks left until the NFL Draft. 3 weeks from right now, we will be on day 2 of the draft. Day 1 will be on the books. Be able to react to all of those first-round picks that are already in. And I'm super excited. We've had another trade in the NFL. These trades keep coming, so let's address that before we get into kind of the meat of the episode today. We're now going to have the New Orleans Saints with 2 first-round picks. The Philadelphia Eagles pick up an extra an extra first-round pick in next year's draft, along with a lot of other picks being swapped in the process. But the Saints, they feel like they're loading up right now. I'll be interested to see what they do with this. I don't think this is going to be a move for a quarterback. I don't know, obviously. I'm not an expert on any of this, but it seems like the way they've kind of situated themselves here, they've now got themselves in position to grab maybe an offensive tackle to replace Teron Armstead, who left in free agency, along with maybe you get another defender in there, whether it be a corner or a linebacker or an edge rusher, somebody to kind of help you put it over the top, maybe even a wide receiver that is definitely still in play, somebody else to kind of help put them back over the top. They definitely feel like they're pretty close, I think, to competing. I would think this move would have made a little more sense if Tom Brady hadn't returned to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The division truly would have been wide open at that point. But still, I think the Saints feel like they're close to competing. I'll be interested to see what they can do with Jameis Winston. He's coming off the torn ACL, so that's a concern. But they were pretty good last year when he was healthy. So there's definitely something to be said for this Saints team being successful with Jameis Winston under center. So interesting one to watch. And for the Eagles side of things here, gives them more draft capital in the future. I think that's a really big thing for the 2023 draft. They're going to give Jalen Hurts the chance this year to show them that he is the quarterback of the future. If he doesn't, now they've got draft capital to move up and go get one of the quarterbacks in what is supposed to be a really, really good quarterback class next year. It's really interesting to me because I always thought the Eagles would try and trade down and pick up future draft picks. I'm just a little surprised to see this move go down so far still ahead of draft day. It seems like this would have made been a move that would have made sense to go down. I don't know. It's interesting to me that this move did not happen on draft day. It's happening so far ahead of time. But still, lots of movement with these NFL draft picks. There are now, if I'm not mistaken, 9 different teams that have multiple first-round picks in this draft, which is just incredible to me. I mean, truly, truly bizarre and kind of wild. So, yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting and really fun draft. I have a feeling we will still see a lot of those draft day trades, a lot of moving around. Not so much for quarterbacks this year because the quarterback class isn't as good as it has been in years past. But, tons to keep an eye on here. Trying to make a mock draft this year that's going to predict what happens in the first round is going to be nearly impossible. Let's just say that. All right, to the meat of this show, we've got another follow-up, essentially, to what we did last week. If you missed last week's episode, I went through and broke down the biggest need for every NFC team after free agency has wrapped up. For the most part, there's still players out there unsigned, still players still signing, but the most of it has kind of subsided at this point, and now we're heading into the draft kind of season of this, and a lot of this stuff is going to be resolved in the draft. So we're going to do the same thing with the AFC this week. So let's take a look here at the biggest team needs for every single AFC team. I'm going to go through, break it down, and kind of give you a little bit of maybe how they could go about approaching this team need as well. So let's start out west like we did last week. We're going to start with the Denver Broncos here, who made a huge offseason move to acquire Russell Wilson. So the outlook for this team has completely changed. Now, the difference here is they don't have a pick until the end of the second round, so it may be a little bit more difficult to address some of the needs, but there's still plenty of talent there, and if they get a couple of these draft picks to hit, there's a really good chance that the Denver Broncos could win this division in 2022. It's a tough ask. It's one of the toughest divisions we've ever seen, but still very much in the realm of possibilities here. So for Denver, I think they need to address linebacker first and foremost the rest of the way here. They went out, they got Russell Wilson. They had to give up. I know they had to give up Noah Fant as part of that deal and Shelby Harris, who's a good defensive tackle. But I think linebacker is the biggest issue. A.J. Johnson and Kenny Young, both still unsigned. So they need to start somebody next to Josie Jewell. So they got to find a linebacker. I think they could do that in the draft. They do pick at 64. There's going to be, I think, a couple of linebackers who are capable of stepping in and maybe even being day one starters there, at the very least being part of the rotation from day one at that spot at the end of the second round. So I think Denver will probably go with its second round pick here and use that on a linebacker. Obviously, there are other areas they could address. They could try and find some depth to bolster the offensive line. Maybe they go after a tight end as well. They do have Albert O from last year's draft, who I think could actually be in for a pretty big increased role here. But tight end definitely an option as well. So who knows? I think the Broncos, though, would be wise to address their linebacker spot before all else once they get to this draft. For the Kansas City Chiefs, this one's pretty obvious. They traded away Tyreek Hill. He's now in Miami. Kansas City needs a wide receiver. They did sign a couple of different free agents in Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but that's not going to quite cut it. Neither of those guys is a true number one wide receiver. They're both kind of in that number 2, number 3 wide receiver range. Now, the thing that helps here is you do have Travis Kelce, and he kind of acts as an additional receiver, but you need somebody else that can be kind of that guy on the outside that can line up out there and kind of give the opposing team nightmares. Now, the Chiefs do have 2 first-round picks, back-to-back picks at the end of the first round. There probably will still be some good receivers there at the end of the draft, but I wouldn't be surprised if they have to maybe move up to really get one of the top receivers in this draft, because they're going to go quickly. There are a lot of teams that have wide receiver needs this year. So I think if Kansas City really has a guy that they like, they're going to have to move up and go get him. I don't think, Jamison Williams is not going to be there. Garrett Wilson's not going to be there. Chris Olave is not going to be there. These guys are just not going to still be on the board. Drake London, I would be shocked if it's still there. Maybe Treylon Burks is still on the board. Maybe Jahan Dotson's still on the board. But yeah, I mean, we're going to see, I think, a lot of receivers come off the board in this first round, especially after watching how much some of these guys are getting paid and the impact that a guy like Jamar Chase can have on an offense. Now, there's nobody on the same level as a prospect as Jamar Chase in this draft class, but still, I think the Chiefs are going to have to be aggressive to really go out there and find that number 1 target in this draft class to work with. Let's go to the Las Vegas Raiders here. They also had a huge offseason. Speaking of wide receivers, they acquired one of the best in the league in Devontae Adams, gave up their first-round pick to do so, and their second-round pick. So they do not pick until the third round. So it's going to be a while before we see the Vegas Raiders actually on the clock here. They also signed Chandler Jones. So they had a really, really big offseason where I think they addressed a lot of their needs. Now, the thing is, though, I still think they need some help at defensive tackle. It's just Jonathan Hankins and Gerald McCoy still unsigned. They could come back to the team, but I still think they could use somebody there and be kind of part of the mix, maybe develop into replacing one of those guys a year from now or something like that. Maybe even find a defensive tackle that's capable of starting in the third round. There's some depth to this defensive tackle class. A couple guys that I could see coming off the board in that, maybe mid-third round range that actually could contribute right away. Might not be elite players, but guys that are capable of starting in the NFL. So I think the Raiders are going to have to address the defensive tackle position here pretty early on. They did kind of bolster the secondary, not quite, but they got Rock Ya-Sin, which is, I think, a solid addition to the secondary. So corner is definitely still an option here as well, especially after they had to cut Damon Darnett in the last year. But I think defensive tackle is where you have to start. All right, let's wrap up the West here by going with the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, the entire right side of the Chargers' offensive line is kind of up in the air right now. You could take your pick, I think, at this spot. It could be right guard or right tackle as their biggest need. I personally went with right guard because at least they have Storm Norton in place. Now, granted, he wasn't very good last year, so if they wanted to upgrade from him with Trevor Penning or Charles Cross or somebody else who's going to be on the board potentially there when they pick at number 17, I don't think that would be a bad idea by any means. I think you need to protect Justin Herbert. That being said, I think right guard, I look at this roster, I don't know who their right guard is going to be for 2022 as of right now. They could go the veteran route, but I really think that it would make a lot more sense. You just got to find somebody here that's capable of stepping in, maybe in the second or third round, to step in and start for you. Now, that's pretty possible, right? As I talked about last week, interior lineman is definitely a position that you can find capable starters in the second or third round. I mean, Creed Humphrey went in the second round last year at center. We had Trey Smith go in the 6th round last year, and he might have been the best offensive guard in the league, at least among rookies. So, I mean, he was one of the guy that you find in the 6th round that's capable of starting right away. So it's those are two instances, and it's not easy, obviously, to hit on that, but it's possible. We see that happen a little bit more frequently when it comes to interior offensive linemen. So I think it's their biggest need. I don't think they're going to spend a first-round pick to fill it. Maybe they go with Kenyon Green, who's capable of playing guard there as well. I don't know. But the offensive line is going to be what the Chargers target in this draft, no question about it. Let's move to the AFC South, the Houston Texans. There's a lot of different directions I think the Texans can go. They're not quite as bad as they were a year ago. They have a couple more building blocks in place. I think Davis Mills has a chance to actually develop into something. And they've got a few pieces in place, but I think for me right now, I'm going to go with edge rusher. And the reason is that they don't really have much. They have Jonathan Grenard, who had a really good rookie season. His 3rd round pick last year for the Texans. But outside of that, there's kind of nothing. They don't really have a whole lot else. Whitney Merciless is retired. They, let Zach Cunningham go. J.J. Watt's got. They've let a lot of the kind of key pieces of this defense walk or get traded or they've just left the team in recent years. So I think they need to rebuild this defense, really add a lot more talent to it. And I would start with edge rusher. It's usually one of the premium positions to address. They've got 2 picks in the top 15. If they don't pick at number 3 in edge rusher, I could very easily see them taking a pick at number 13, which is the pick that they acquired in the Deshaun Watson trade with the Browns. So there's a couple different areas I think they could look to address it. I would be pretty surprised if they walked out of the first round without one edge rusher on their play. Maybe they go defensive tackle, right? That's an option as well. But I would be really shocked if they spent both these picks on the offense. They've got a defensive head coach in Lovie Smith now. I don't know how long he's going to be there. Obviously, we've seen the Texans have got a very short leash. They've not been afraid to fire coaches very quickly. Sorry, David Culley, but the truth is that this team needs an infusion of talent on defense, and I think edge rusher is the place to go. For the Indianapolis Colts, it's got to be wide receiver here. They got Matt Ryan, which great move by them, honestly. I really like this trade. It's an upgrade over Carson Wentz, I think. I think that Ryan still has a little bit left in the tank, but obviously it doesn't help them down the line. They still need to figure out what the long-term solution is at quarterback. But I think 2 years, you got Matt Ryan. He can still be a capable starter in the NFL. He's a good player. He needs a little more talent around him, which is why I think their biggest need is wide receiver. So the Colts do not have a first-round pick this year, but there is depth to this wide receiver class. So I could easily see them finding somebody capable of playing out there on the outside with Michael Pittman Jr. The problem is that I just don't know if they're going to get somebody who's going to be the type of game-breaking talent that you would expect and you really think this offense needs to really make that next step. Now, they could still go out into free agency as well. Julio Jones obviously has a lot of familiarity with Matt Ryan from their time spent in Atlanta. He could easily come and join the Colts. I think it's been a very popular kind of connection there that I've seen online. People speculating that maybe Jones is going to head to go play with his former quarterback again, reunite in Indy. But I think wide receiver, as of right now, you have to address the position above all else. You can't go into this season with Michael Pittman Jr. and just kind of that's it. I mean, T.Y. Hilton is still out there. He's getting older. Maybe you bring him back for another year, but he struggled to stay healthy. Zach Pascal is gone. I don't think you can count on Paris Campbell at this point. I mean, I know he's electric when he's healthy, but the problem is he can't stay healthy. So there's just a lot that I think you look at that wide receiver room and say they need some help there more than anything else in the world. All right, let's move to the Jacksonville Jaguars, owners of the number 1 pick in this draft. And this is actually what I don't think they're going to fill this void here with the number 1 overall pick. But that's because I think their biggest need here is center, actually. Andrew Norwell retired, and that's created a pretty significant need. They have Tyler Shatley is still there. He's fine. He can step in and do it for a year if they really want to, but I think one of the biggest issues for young quarterbacks in their early stages in the NFL is that they oftentimes don't have the protection they need to be able to be successful. They don't have the time. They start looking for the rush. I mean, we saw it pretty much break Carson Wentz. The guy has not been the same since he had that just injury-riddled season with the Eagles in 2020. And it just is one of those things where it just feels like you kind of need to put a really solid offensive line in front of Trevor Lawrence to give him a chance to take that next step. You invested a wide receiver in the offseason, right? You went out, you signed Zay Jones, you spent big money on Christian Kirk. You still have Marvin Jones Jr., Laviska Shenault is there. They have wide receivers there. They have a pretty good running back room as well. You've got Travis Etienne, who's hopefully going to be healthy this year, coming off a Liz Frank injury. James Robinson as well, who was a breakout player in 2020. So there are some pieces in place for this team to be successful at offense, but I think you just need to keep the offensive line there. Yeah, I don't think you can just pass on this again and hope that Lawrence can figure it out and really grow without the necessary protection there. They did go out and sign Brandon Sheriff, which I thought was a great move in free agency to shore up some of the interior. Maybe at the beginning of the second round, they have that 33rd overall pick. Maybe you go center there if there's a guy on the board you like. But I think they have to address center here in this draft. It won't be with the number 1 overall pick. I can guarantee you that. They're going to go with either an edge rusher or a tackle. It's pretty much set in stone. I don't think they're going to go any other direction at this point. It's likely going to be Aiden Hutchinson. But I think you have to address the center position down the line because you just can't wait too much longer to see if Trevor Lawrence really has it. You can't just keep saying, oh, well, we'll get there. We'll get there. He's super talented. Give the guy protection and let him be successful. Tennessee Titans to wrap up the AFC South. Their biggest need for me has to be at right tackle. Now, you know the story if you follow the draft and you're a big NFL fan or even just a Titans fan, and I'm sorry to bring this up if you are a Titans fan because it's a little painful, but they swung and missed really badly on Isaiah Wilson in 2020. They went out, they drafted him in the first round, which was a reach by a lot of people's standards. I didn't think Isaiah Wilson was a first-round tackle, but I thought, okay, he kind of fit what they were trying to do out there in Tennessee. They like to run the ball. He's a good run blocker. Problem is that he just couldn't seem to ever figure out a lot of the off-the-field stuff. He was irresponsible, didn't control his weight, really bad conditioning. So there's a lot there that you look at and you say, okay, I understand that maybe this was a reach, but I don't think that this went beyond just him not being good enough at football. So anyway, the point is that they need to find somebody else to play there. David Quessenberry has been pretty solid at that position in the past couple of years, kind of filling in as a stopgap guy, but he's a free agent right now. So you've got either Dylan Radins or Nate Davis who will probably switch in and play at right guard. So I think if you find a right tackle in this draft, I think you're going to feel really good about how this offensive line shapes up. You're going to get Derrick Henry back healthy. Ryan Tannehill's back for another year. I know he struggled, obviously. You've had two pretty disappointing ends to the last couple of seasons with him throwing interceptions to cost Titans the game. But right now, I think you have to invest in that offensive line, and then maybe you look to try and address wide receiver, linebacker. There's a couple other spots on that roster that you go further down once you get deeper and deeper into the draft. At number 25, there could be a couple of tackles there that could be in play at the end of the first round. Maybe a Darian Kennard, Bernard Raymond. There's a couple guys that could definitely come off the board once you get into that late first round stage. I'll be interested to see what the Titans decide to do there, but I think they have to go right tackle. Baltimore Ravens to start off the AFC North. The Ravens could go a couple different directions here. Edge rusher would definitely not be a bad idea either, but they did draft Odafe Oweh last year. So for me, I'm going to go with defensive tackle here, and that's because Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams are both currently unsigned. They did bring in Michael Pierce, which I think was a really good move, but I think they just need to go out right now and they need to find somebody else to play on that defensive line. The Ravens love having a really strong front seven. And for me, if a guy like Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, those couple of guys that are going to be there out of Georgia are on the board at 13 when they pick, feels like a slam dunk opportunity there to go and really bolster that front four. There's going to be, I think, a lot of talent available at the edge rusher position later in the draft. So I would go with defensive tackle as their biggest need here, especially you look at how this draft's going to shake up. And then you maybe try and find another edge rusher to grab there and develop in the second or third round as you continue to bolster that defense. Also wouldn't be a terrible idea to find a Lamar Jackson, another weapon to work with, just saying. But I think defensive tackle, biggest need for the Ravens right now as they head into the draft. For the Cincinnati Bengals, the defending AFC champs, I kind of still can't believe I'm saying that. They, if we had done this 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, would have just been offensive line, right? That was what they struggled with all of last year. They struggled with that in the Super Bowl, right? Joe Burrow just got sacked constantly this season, especially in the postseason. But they went out, they signed Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, and they also signed Lyle Collins. So they really loaded up on this offensive line. It looks like a pretty solid unit right now. You can nitpick some of the things and say maybe they could upgrade here or there, but this is a pretty solid offensive line right now. So for me, the biggest need now becomes cornerback. They have Chidobe Awuzie, who had had a fantastic year as a free agent signing last year. Career year for him, and if he keeps it up, he looks like one of the better corners in the NFL. But they don't really have a whole lot else behind him. I know Eli Apple, that's a loaded topic right there, right? He's kind of somebody that a lot of fans love to hate. Sometimes he plays great, and sometimes he looks like burnt toast. So it's a little bit too much inconsistency for me to really feel confident in him standing up out there. You got Mike Hilton playing the slot, but I think you could use a number 2 corner. And I think that's actually a really good spot the Bengals find themselves in at the end of the first round with guys like Trey McDuffie, Kaiir Elam, Roger McCreary, Andrew Booth Jr. that could be there at the end of the first round. That could really bolster the secondary and give the Bengals a strength back there. They brought back Jesse Bates for another year. Von Bell's still there. You have another corner to play alongside Awuzie. Suddenly that secondary looks really, really good. And that would be a really, really big problem for the rest of the AFC North. Let's move to the Cleveland Browns, who made the splashiest move of the offseason by far, which is saying something when you consider how many splashy moves went down, but I think this one takes the cake. Deshaun Watson, now the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. They did trade for Amari Cooper, but I still feel like they need another receiver here. They don't have Jarvis Landry as of now. There has been some conversation out there about the possibility of him coming back to the team, but they cut him earlier this offseason. Odell Beckham Jr., they released last year in the middle of the season. They have a couple of young receivers like Rashad Higgins and Donovan Peoples-Jones, but I think those guys are kind of better as third or fourth options on the team. You need somebody else to go out there, play with Amari Cooper, give them another playmaker on this offense. I think you got to go wide receiver. They don't have a first-round pick, so they'll probably be looking either to free agency here or to the second or third round. But there's a lot of depth this wide receiver class. So you can find a guy capable of being a starter in the second or third round in this class. I truly believe that. So I think the Browns are in a pretty good spot right now to address one of their biggest needs. I wouldn't be panicking, but yeah, they definitely need to continue to address the wide receiver position. The Pittsburgh Steelers, to wrap up the AFC North, they need a left tackle. I'm sorry. They need to address this offensive line. Did they not watch last season? I cannot understand how this team is still not investing a ton of resources in this offensive line. Ben Roethlisberger obviously was at the end of his career last year, was trying to make that final push. Shockingly, the Steelers did make the postseason, so got to give them credit for that. But that offensive line was really bad for most of the season. And right now they've got David Moore Jr. slated to start there, who did not have a great rookie season. Maybe they're hoping he takes that next step. For me, I don't feel super confident in that, and I think they have to go left tackle. You could also argue center is a need here. They got Mason Cole on the roster right now. I don't feel super great about him being the starting center. So there are definitely a lot of different spots on that offensive line that the Steelers could look to upgrade still. They don't pick until number 20. There's been a lot of buzz about them being really interested in this quarterback class. They might go up and try and make a move to go get a Malik Willis, a Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral. I'm hearing some buzz. Maybe Desmond Ridder is going to work his way into the first round. So we'll see what ends up happening here. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go. But if I'm the Steelers and you got Mitch Trubisky as kind of this bridge quarterback for you right now, let him be the bridge, build that offensive line, and then try and find the quarterback of the future after that. Because if you put Malik Willis back there right now, he's going to get crushed. It's just not going to go well. So that's my 2 cents on it. I would definitely go left tackle in this draft class before all else. Trevor Penning could definitely be on the board there. Maybe Charles Cross if he slides a little bit. We'll see what ends up happening. And if the Steelers draft a quarterback, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad move by them. But I just don't see a quarterback stepping in and being successful in this offense behind that offensive line that they currently have constructed. Now, they obviously have other draft picks. You can address it later in the draft and all of that. But they haven't done great doing that in recent years either. So I'd rather spend the premium pick and get the best possible prospect to work with there as well. All right, so that's the AFC North. Let's finish up with the AFC East here. And let's start with the Buffalo Bills, the defending champs of the division, and a team that actually helped change some overtime rules in the NFL. They can kind of say that they were responsible, not really responsible, but because Josh Allen didn't get the ball in overtime against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, now we have some new playoff overtime rules. Now, the biggest thing for them, I think they need to go after a right guard. They did sign Roger Saffold, which is a good move by them, but he's played left guard throughout most of his career, so I think they got to find somebody else to really bolster that interior of that offensive line. You could certainly argue corner is a possibility here as well, but they've got Tre'Davious White. I still believe I actually really like some of the other guys in that secondary that can step up and I think continue to develop. And so I think corner is certainly still a need. I'm not saying you don't need to draft anybody or whatever like that, but I think if you're there at the end of the first round, you got maybe a Zion Johnson, Bernard Raymond, or somebody who's going to be able to step in. If Kenyon Green slides into that spot, the Buffalo Bills should jump all over that. Protect Josh Allen, give him a wall in front of him, and go from there. And then you find your corner, you find a running back later in the draft that you continue to fill out the rest of the roster. So yeah, I go offensive line, protect Josh Allen. The guy takes a beating sometimes. You let him go back there and kind of keep him healthy. I think it's going to make a really big difference in the longevity of his career. You invested a ton of money in the guy, protect him. For the Miami Dolphins, I think their biggest need is running back. The only team that I've said this about so far. There are some teams that certainly need a running back, right? The Atlanta Falcons need a running back, right? There are teams out there that need running backs, but Miami, they've done a pretty good job of constructing this roster to the point where they really just need to find a running back because their running game has been pretty bad the last couple of years. Myles Gaskin has done a solid job stepping in, but he doesn't seem to have really earned the trust in Miami. They have a brand new coaching staff, so if Mike McDaniel is able to harness the Kyle Shanahan magic and just turn anybody into a fantastic running back in this system, then maybe you could argue they don't really need to go out and get a running back. But if you go out and get somebody in the second round, like Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker III, I think that would make a really big impact on this offense, and it would take a ton of pressure off of Tua Tagovailoa, who is feeling the pressure right now because everybody's saying, "Okay, Tua, you got to get this done now." And I'm not saying that like he doesn't deserve that pressure, but give him all of the tools possible to succeed. Interior offensive line certainly a need here as well. I could see the Dolphins going that direction when they're up on the clock again, finally in the second round. But I would start by going and getting a running back and working from there and trying to figure out what you can do to bolster the offensive line, whether it be in free agency. They've drafted a lot of players, young players in recent years, see if it continues to develop and maybe take that next step this year. The Dolphins are getting close to being a really good competitive team in the AFC. But the problem is the AFC is just so loaded right now. We'll see what ends up happening, but they certainly could. I think running back would be a really smart move for the Dolphins to just try and take some pressure off of Tua. New England Patriots, there are a couple different directions the Patriots could go here. Wide receiver certainly still feels like an option, even though they traded for Devontae Parker. Parker has been good, but not great throughout his career. He's had some issues with injuries, so I don't know that you look at that and say the wide receiver issue is solved. Linebacker, also definitely a need, if you ask me. I would start, though, with corner. They lost J.C. Jackson, and they signed Malcolm Butler, but I don't know what version of Malcolm Butler we're going to see. He was out of football last year. He struggled towards the end of his tenure in Tennessee, and then he briefly in Arizona. So I don't know that you can count on him to completely fix the secondary right now or give you the same kind of boost that you just lost. I mean, you just lost one of the best cover corners in the NFL in J.C. Jackson. So I'd say they have to go corner in the first round here. Andrew Booth, Kyer Elam, both going to be in play here. Trent McDuffie, guys that are going to be there at the end of the first round. They could spend a second round pick on this as well. But, to me, looking at their secondary, I think they have to find a corner in the first round of this draft. If a wide receiver is there they love, I'm not going to bash them for it, right? If Jameson Williams is on the board and they really love that guy, then go get him. If get Chris Olave's there, draft him. There's not you got to go with the best player available, but corner is their biggest need. So if there's a corner there they really like, then you should take them, is how I'm assessing this for the Patriots. All right, let's finish up with the New York Jets. They have a couple different picks in the top 10, so there's a couple different ways they could address this one. I'd say edge rusher is their biggest need right now. They did a good job bolstering the secondary, at least at the corner position. They do have a need at safety, no question about that. But Carl Lawson will hopefully be back this year. A lot of optimism around him last year prior to him tearing the Achilles in the preseason. Still devastated by that one personally, but we're getting over it. We're going to move past it. So I think they need someone to pair with Lawson. They've been trying to find a pass rush for, I don't know, 12 years, something like that, since John Abraham essentially left town in like 2008. It's been a really, really long time since the Jets have had an elite pass rush. And so I think what they need to do is you just go out, you try and find a way to bolster this defensive front. They've got Quinnen Williams there, who I really like and I think is going to be a super talented player, assuming they want to keep him long term. Somebody who could really push the pocket and make an impact there. But you get two quality edge rushers there and you get Williams on the inside. My goodness, that really changes this whole complexion of this defense. Robert Saleh, defensive guy, obviously. I think the Jets will be all over the edge rusher class early on here. And yes, there's depth to it as well. I could see them certainly waiting to the second round. They've got 2 second-round picks as well. But I think if there's somebody there in the top 10, whether it's, if they're one of the top guys slides, whether it's Aiden Hutchinson, Travon Walker, Kayvon Thibodeau, all those guys are certainly in play. If you get to around 10, maybe Jermaine Johnson comes into play here as well. Later, early second round, David Ajabo maybe. There's a lot of guys that could be in play here for the Jets. I could see them spending even more than one pick in this draft on edge rusher. But for me, they have to address this early on. They've got so many different picks in the top 50 of the draft. You need to spend at least one of them on an edge rusher. So that's going to do it for the AFC East. That's going to do it for the AFC. That's going to pretty much wrap up the show. But I really appreciate everyone tuning in. Make sure you continue to subscribe, rate, review the show. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, at Aftermath Sports on both sites there. So really appreciate all the support that I've been getting so far. And if you have any suggestions, things you want to see on the show, questions you want to ask, never hesitate to reach out. I always love hearing from people and, got somebody else kind of spark a conversation here. But yeah, this has been really fun. As always, make sure you check out the podcast. We are on Spotify, we are on Stitcher, we are on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts, on Anchor. There also all the places that you want to try and find this podcast should be there. If there's a spot where you cannot find the podcast that you want to be able to listen to it, let me know. I'll do my best to try and get it on that platform as well. Thanks everyone so much for tuning in. You guys will hear from me again next week.